Michael Sanders stepped out of his sleek black car, the city lights reflecting off his polished shoes. His tailored suit hugged his body like armor, every step purposeful, every glance dismissive. He was late, minutes away from securing the biggest deal of his career. The restaurant's entrance gleamed ahead. Then a figure moved in his path, a man, ragged, with grime on his cheeks and desperation in his eyes. His hand trembled slightly as he extended it, not even asking, just hoping. Michael didn't stop. He scowled and muttered loudly, "Get a job, you parasite." People turned. The man flinched, but said nothing. Michael adjusted his tie, proud. To him, weakness was a choice. Pity was for the useless. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Mr. Daniel Brooks, the potential investor, rose from his table and smiled. "Michael, good to see you. But before we begin, I'd like you to meet someone important." A server opened the front door. The homeless man stepped in. Michael froze. "What the hell is this?" Daniel's expression turned cold. "This man has something to say. Listen carefully." Michael's stomach dropped. The mask of certainty cracked. Something was coming, something that would destroy everything he believed he was. Don't miss stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. Subscribe now and turn on the bell so you're first to witness powerful true life turns. These aren't just videos, they're wake-up calls. Join a community that sees beyond appearances. One story can change everything. This might be yours. Michael Sanders grew up in a trailer park on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. His mother worked 2 jobs, and his father vanished when Michael was just 8. One day he was there, the next, gone. No note, no explanation, only silence. That silence hardened Michael. He decided early on that he would never be weak again, never poor, never abandoned. While other kids played, Michael studied. He watched, he learned, he plotted his escape. By high school, he was top of his class. A full ride to an Ivy League school followed, then internships, promotions, and eventually a corner office overlooking downtown Chicago. At 39, Michael had everything he thought mattered: a high-rise apartment, a Tesla, a Rolex, and a fiancée who looked like she stepped out of a fashion magazine. But behind the tailored suits and business awards, Michael carried a deep, unspoken shame. He told no one about his past, not even Jessica. He'd erased it, rewritten himself. To Michael, success meant distance. Distance from where he came from. Distance from people who reminded him of that past, especially the homeless. They were, to him, living proof of failure, of weakness, of everything he fought to escape. He walked fast past them, avoided eye contact, and if they spoke, he responded with disgust. His friends admired his discipline. His boss praised his aggression. Jessica loved his drive, but none of them saw the truth. Michael was terrified. Terrified that if he slowed down, if he let his guard down, the past would catch him. That one day, the dirt, the shame, the broken pieces of his childhood would claw their way back into his spotless world. So, he ran, every day. With every deal, every dollar, he built a fortress to keep the past out. He never imagined it would find a way in. And he certainly never imagined it would wear the face of a homeless man. For Michael Sanders, this wasn't just another business deal. It was the deal, the one that would cement his place at the top. If he closed with Daniel Brooks, a multimillionaire investor with a reputation for social impact, he'd be named senior partner at his firm, something only a handful had ever achieved before 40. He'd been preparing for weeks, every number memorized, every slide rehearsed. He knew Brooks wanted more than just profit. He wanted legacy. Michael, ever the strategist, had packaged the proposal to reflect social values, community outreach, and sustainability. None of it meant anything to him, but it would close the deal. He imagined it all. A private celebration with Jessica, headlines in business journals, his name etched onto the office door beside the firm's founding partners. It wasn't just ambition, it was vengeance against everything he'd come from. Every handshake would be proof that he'd made it on his own, that he'd survived without a father, that he'd won. But behind the polished confidence, Michael was anxious. Daniel Brooks wasn't like his usual clients. He had a reputation for intuition, for reading people. There was a weight to his presence, something that unsettled Michael, even through their emails and calls. Still, Michael believed he could outmaneuver anyone. That morning he shaved twice, had his shoes buffed, reviewed the presentation until the numbers danced in his head. Everything had to be perfect. At the restaurant, he arrived just 5 minutes late, a rare misstep caused by traffic and an argument with Jessica over something trivial she claimed he never listened to. Then came the homeless man at the door, a minor annoyance, something beneath him. Michael didn't even think before speaking. His insult wasn't planned, it was reflex, a release valve for the stress. He didn't realize who had seen it. He didn't realize why it would matter. Inside, as Daniel greeted him with a firm handshake and a knowing smile, Michael felt reassured. The setting was elegant, the service flawless. He launched into his pitch with smooth confidence until Daniel raised a hand to stop him. "There's someone I want you to meet before we go on," Daniel said. Michael blinked. "Now?" Daniel nodded. The doors opened, and everything Michael thought he controlled, his image, his plan, his past, was about to be shattered. Michael's stomach tightened the moment the man stepped through the doors. Same ragged clothes, same hollow eyes, same silence. The homeless man from outside. Michael felt the heat rush to his face, confusion twisted into panic. What the hell was this? Some test? Daniel Brooks stood calm, almost solemn. "Michael, this is Edward. I invited him here today." Michael scoffed. "You brought him." Daniel didn't blink. "I did. He's not just a man on the street. He's someone you should know." Michael turned to Edward, who now stood just feet away. There was something behind those tired eyes, something Michael couldn't place. Familiarity, pain. Edward spoke slowly, voice cracked. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Michael didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind raced for context, for logic. He looked to Daniel, expecting explanation, but the investor only stepped back, letting the moment unfold. Edward took out a worn, folded photograph. His hands trembled as he opened it. It was old, faded, creased, but unmistakable. A boy with messy brown hair and crooked front teeth, holding a man's hand, Michael's hand. He staggered back. No, it couldn't be. "Michael, I'm your father," Edward said softly. Time collapsed. The room blurred. The walls of certainty cracked. Michael's chest tightened. His breath shortened. Sweat gathered at his collar. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not now. He stared at the man, this shell of a person, trying to reconcile the face in the photo with the one before him. It didn't make sense. His father was gone, dead, or worse, irrelevant. "No," Michael muttered. "This is a mistake. You're lying." But Edward's eyes didn't shift. There was no performance, only grief, deep, raw. Daniel finally spoke. "He reached out to me months ago. Said he wanted one chance to see you again, to explain." Michael shook his head, stumbling to his feet. "I don't need this. I don't want this." He looked at Daniel, pleading. "This is unprofessional. Insane." Daniel's voice was calm. "What's insane is the way you treated him outside, without knowing, without caring." Michael's face burned with shame. The pitch was over. The deal destroyed. The moment he'd spent his life building toward had crumbled under the weight of a single truth. He had humiliated his own father, and everyone saw it. Michael didn't remember walking out of the restaurant. He didn't remember what he said to Daniel or how he ended the meeting. The world outside felt too loud, too bright, like he had stepped onto a different planet. His phone vibrated endlessly in his pocket. Texts from Jessica, missed calls from the office, but he ignored them all. He drove for hours without direction, face frozen, jaw clenched. The word kept echoing in his head. Dad. It didn't fit. It didn't belong. That man, dirty, broken, pathetic, couldn't be the same one who vanished all those years ago, but the photo didn't lie. Neither did those eyes. And yet, how could he have done that? How could a father just disappear? Back at his apartment, he threw his keys on the counter and stared at the city skyline. The view that once made him feel powerful now mocked him. He had spent his entire life building a fortress to protect himself from pain, and with one look, it had all fallen apart. He thought about calling Jessica, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. What would he even say? That he had insulted a homeless man who turned out to be his father. That the biggest meeting of his life ended in public humiliation. The next morning, the fallout began. His assistant called, nervous, whispering that Daniel Brooks had pulled out of the deal. Word had spread quickly. "You need to come in," she said. "The partners want a meeting." But Michael didn't move. For the first time in years, he stayed home, in bed, silent. Days passed. Jessica came by once, saw the mess, asked a few questions. But Michael gave short, distant answers. She didn't push. She left without saying, "I love you." At work, things unraveled. The partners removed him from the Brooks account entirely. "We need to protect the firm's image," they said. His reputation, once pristine, was now poisoned by a single act of arrogance. But the worst part wasn't losing the deal. It wasn't the embarrassment. It wasn't even Jessica pulling away. It was the silence that followed. The absence of everything he thought defined him. The long hours staring at his reflection, wondering what kind of man couldn't recognize his own father. Michael started drinking. Not heavily, just enough to dull the ache, enough to help him sleep through the night without dreaming of that moment in the restaurant. But the dreams came anyway. Flashbacks to his childhood, his father's voice, a laugh, then nothing, a door closing, a mother crying, a boy sitting on the floor waiting. One night, desperate for answers, Michael opened the dusty box in the back of his closet. Inside were old photos, report cards, birthday cards. At the bottom, something he didn't remember ever seeing, a bundle of letters, all addressed to him, from Edward Sanders. Hands trembling, Michael opened the first one. It was dated years ago. The handwriting shaky, the words full of sorrow. Apologies, please, love. One after another, he read them, each one unraveling the story he thought he knew. His mother had lied. She hadn't told him about the letters, had never mentioned the call. She had erased his father completely. The pain turned into something sharper. Not just grief, betrayal. He had spent his whole life hating a ghost when the truth was far more complicated. And somewhere out there, that ghost was alive, alone, on the streets. And Michael had spit in his face. If this story is touching something deep in you, don't hold it in. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, your silence, your story, and if you're feeling this moment, give it a like. Sometimes all it takes to start healing is knowing you're not alone in what you feel. 3 days passed before Michael left his apartment again. He didn't shave, didn't dress in his usual crisp suit. Just jeans, a hoodie, and worn sneakers. Clothes he hadn't worn in years. He had no plan, just one name circling in his mind: Edward Sanders. He walked the streets like a stranger in his own city. He passed by the same corners he used to speed through in his car. Only now he looked, really looked, at the faces, at the people sitting in silence, at the pain hiding in plain sight. It was early evening when he saw him, sitting on a bench near a shelter downtown, holding a paper cup with both hands, head lowered. Michael stopped several feet away. He didn't know what to say. How do you talk to someone you've hated your entire life? Someone you humiliated in front of the world? Edward looked up, his face slow to recognize. Then his expression changed. Guarded, cautious. "I don't want anything," Michael said quickly. I read your letters." Edward didn't speak. Michael sat on the bench beside him, leaving space. "Why didn't you fight harder?" he asked. "Why did you just disappear?" Edward took a breath. "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I made mistakes. I was weak, but I tried to come back. She wouldn't let me. I didn't have the money or the power. Just hope." The words hit like bricks. Michael thought of his own life. How much he valued control, how he despised weakness. But here, sitting next to this man, he didn't feel strong. He felt small. Edward pulled something from his coat, a photo, the same one from the restaurant. "I carried this every day," he said. "It's the only thing I never lost." Michael's throat tightened. There were no tears, no dramatic breakdowns, just silence. Two men sitting shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by noise, yet alone in a quiet that said everything. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Edward said. "I just wanted you to know I never stopped loving you." Michael nodded. He couldn't speak. His chest ached in a way he didn't have words for. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel anger. He felt the weight of understanding, the kind that doesn't shout. It whispers. And in that whisper, something began to shift. Michael didn't tell anyone about the meeting on the bench. Not Jessica, not his co-workers. It wasn't something he could explain in words. It was something he carried, quietly, heavily, but with a strange sense of purpose. The next morning, he returned. Edward was still there, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, hands tucked into the sleeves of an old army jacket. When he saw Michael approach, his eyes lit up, not with excitement, but with something gentler, hope without expectation. "I thought you might not come back," Edward said. "I almost didn't," Michael admitted. This time he brought food, 2 breakfast sandwiches. He didn't know what Edward liked. It didn't matter. They ate mostly in silence. No small talk, just presence. The next day, Michael returned again. And the next. Over the following weeks, he helped Edward get into a shelter, then a rehab program. He found a local non-profit that specialized in helping unhoused veterans, and Edward, surprisingly, opened up to them. The man who had once been silent and broken was beginning to speak again, to trust. Michael took care of paperwork, ID replacement, insurance, appointments, things most people took for granted. It was strange how simple acts like filling out a form could suddenly feel so meaningful. He also started asking questions about his childhood, about the years Edward had disappeared. The answers weren't clean. They were messy, full of regret, addiction, missed opportunities. But they were real. And that truth, raw and ugly, was something Michael hadn't experienced in a long time. At the same time, something shifted in him. He started noticing others. People he used to walk past without a second glance. A woman wrapped in plastic bags talking to herself. A teenage boy sitting alone with a backpack and empty eyes. They weren't problems anymore. They were people. One afternoon, while waiting outside the clinic for Edward's appointment to finish, Michael saw a man trying to calm his young daughter, who was crying. The man looked tired, scared, embarrassed. Without thinking, Michael approached and offered a bottle of water and a granola bar from his car. "Thanks," the man said, clearly stunned. Michael just nodded. It was small. Insignificant, maybe. But for him, it felt like the beginning of something. He didn't post about it, didn't tell anyone, but that night, for the first time in weeks, he slept without waking up, gasping for air. Michael knew progress wasn't linear, but he didn't expect it to hurt this much. At first, things had moved fast, almost too fast. Edward had started attending group therapy, even cracked a few jokes during one of their drives. Michael, cautiously optimistic, had begun to believe this might be their second chance. Then came the call from the shelter. Edward had vanished, gone for 2 days. No warning, no explanation. Michael found him slumped behind a liquor store, his breath heavy with alcohol, eyes glazed over. "You lied," Michael said, his voice shaking. "You said you were trying." Edward didn't argue. He didn't defend himself, he just whispered, "I'm sorry." Michael turned and walked away. That night he told Jessica everything. The letters, the meeting, the relapse. She listened silently, then said, "You've changed." He looked at her, surprised. She didn't mean it as a compliment. "I don't recognize you anymore," she continued. "You're not focused, not you." He realized in that moment that she loved the version of him that was always winning, always polished, always disconnected, and he wasn't that man anymore. A week later, they broke off the engagement. Michael felt the loss deeply, but not in the same way as before. It didn't destroy him. It revealed him. He saw who had stood by him out of love and who had stood by him for the image. He returned to Edward a few days later, helped him detox. Again, it was harder this time. The trust had cracked. The weight of disappointment was heavier, but Michael stayed. He began volunteering once a week at the non-profit shelter. No cameras, no headlines, just presence. He helped sort clothing, drive people to appointments, even sat through a few support group sessions. The stories he heard humbled him. People who'd had lives, families, businesses, only to lose it all after one bad break, one injury, one addiction. It shook his worldview to its core. There were moments he wanted to give up, when Edward snapped at him, when he showed up drunk again, when his old colleagues mocked him for turning into a bleeding heart. But every time he thought about quitting, he remembered that boy, himself, waiting at the door for a father who never came back. He couldn't be that man again. And slowly, painfully, they rebuilt, brick by brick. Not a perfect relationship, but a real one. A year passed. Edward was now living in a small, shared apartment managed by the non-profit. He was sober. He attended weekly meetings, volunteered at the shelter that once saved him, and helped newcomers find their footing. His face had changed. More color, more peace. The lines were still there, but now they told a story of survival, not defeat. Michael still visited regularly. They talked, laughed sometimes, argued too, but the silence between them had softened. It wasn't cold anymore, it was familiar, safe. One afternoon, Michael got a call from his former firm. They wanted to meet. A new initiative was being formed, a corporate social responsibility program aimed at reinvesting in underserved communities. The board remembered the Brooks deal, remembered the fallout, but they also heard about Michael's recent work. Quiet, consistent, unpublicized. They wanted his help. He didn't answer right away. That weekend, the shelter hosted a community event. Free meals, health screenings, music. The executive director asked Michael if he would speak, share his journey. He hesitated, but Edward encouraged him. "Tell the truth," Edward said. "People need to hear it." Michael stood at the front of a small crowd, gripping the edges of a cheap plastic podium. He cleared his throat. His voice cracked on the first sentence. "A year ago, I was a man obsessed with success." He paused, looked at Edward, who gave him a nod. "I believed money made you worthy. That status was everything. I walked past people like you every day, convinced you were just lazy, broken, but I was the broken one." He told the story, the restaurant, the insult, the moment the world cracked open. He didn't hide the shame. He let them feel it. And when he finished, he looked at Edward and said through tears, "The man I rejected that day is the man who saved me." The crowd stood. Some clapped, some cried. After the event, reporters asked for interviews. Michael declined. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. Later that night, sitting with Edward under the fading orange sky, Michael pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "What's that?" Edward asked. "A letter," Michael replied. "To Mom." Edward's eyes dimmed. "I'm not ready to send it," Michael added. "But I want her to know what happened, what you tried, what I missed." Edward nodded slowly. "That's enough for me." A few months later, Michael returned to the firm, not as a partner, but as the head of their new outreach division. His office was smaller, his salary too, but he'd never felt richer. He hired people from the shelter, created paid internships for recovering addicts and ex-convicts, launched a mentorship program for youth aging out of foster care. He and Edward still had their moments. Old wounds don't heal overnight, but they healed slowly, together. One evening, Edward joined him on stage at a citywide fundraiser. Michael introduced him not as my father, but as the man who reminded me who I really am. The audience rose, but the most important thing wasn't the applause. It was the way Edward smiled. Proud, steady, whole. For the first time, Michael wasn't performing. He was simply home. Michael often said the moment that changed his life wasn't when he saw his father again. It was when he realized how easily he had dehumanized a stranger. He used to believe that success meant rising above others, that if you worked hard enough, you earned the right to judge. But he learned the truth the hard way. It's much easier to climb when you forget who you're stepping over. He had spent years convincing himself he was self-made, that his pain was fuel, his trauma a tool, but in truth he was running, not from poverty, but from vulnerability, from empathy. And when that caught up to him, in the form of a broken man with his own eyes and his name, he couldn't run anymore. He says that the biggest lie he ever believed was that pain made you weak. Now he knows pain connects us, that healing doesn't happen in silence or pride or polished boardrooms. It happens in the quiet moments, over coffee on a park bench, in awkward apologies, in choosing to stay when it's easier to walk away. And most of all, he learned this. Sometimes the person you try hardest to erase is the one who holds the key to your redemption. Today, Michael Sanders is no longer the man chasing skyscrapers and corner offices. He still works in the corporate world, but now his mission is different. Under his leadership, the firm's outreach division has grown into one of the most respected community programs in the city. He doesn't just manage budgets. He mentors. He listens. He shows up. He speaks at high schools, shelters, and recovery centers, not as a motivational speaker, but as someone who failed publicly and chose to rebuild. People relate to him not because he's polished, but because he's honest. His relationship with Edward isn't perfect, but it's real. They have dinner once a week. They argue about sports, laugh at old movies, and sometimes just sit in silence, grateful for a second chance neither of them ever expected. Edward has become something of a legend at the shelter. The comeback dad, they call him. He helps other men reconnect with children they thought they'd lost forever. As for Michael, he doesn't talk about legacy anymore. He talks about presence, about showing up when it's hardest, about loving without conditions, because he knows now real success isn't what you build outside. It's what you rebuild inside when the world gives you a second chance. Have you ever judged someone without knowing their story? Michael did. And it nearly cost him everything. This isn't just a story about a man and his father. It's a reminder that every person you pass on the street, ignore in the hallway, or dismiss in frustration is carrying something you can't see. We all have a choice, to look away or to look closer. If this story made you think, made you feel, then take a moment to reflect. What would you have done in Michael's place? Leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your experiences, your regrets, or your second chances. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's stuck in anger or pride or silence, send this video to them. Because healing often begins with a single act of courage, facing the truth. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds us of what it means to be human. And remember, sometimes the hardest people to forgive are the ones who look back at us in the mirror, but that's where redemption begins, right there, with you.